Eala. She's a very dangerous player.
The instant Alex Eala dropped to her knees in tears on center court, fans around the world were left stunned. It looked like the emotional release of a single unforgettable victory, but the real story didn't begin on that famous stage. The key to understanding that powerful moment wasn't lying on the grass beside her, and it wasn't tucked away inside her tennis bag.
For someone who grew up in the Philippines and...
Instead, it begins thousands of miles away in a simple shoebox inside a Manila home. Resting inside are a pair of tiny light-up shoes whose batteries stopped working years ago, alongside a pair of ruffled socks that no longer fit anyone. To most people, they're just old childhood keepsakes. To Alex Eala's family, they're quiet reminders of where an extraordinary journey first began.
I went to train with brother and my grandfather every day after school with my ruffled socks and my light-up shoes and chubby cheeks.
Those tiny shoes once belonged to a little girl who raced onto a tennis court every afternoon after school, gripping a racket that seemed almost as tall as she was. She chased her older brother through practice drills, chased every ball with relentless determination, and chased the approving smile of her grandfather with every swing. That little girl is now 21-year-old Alex Eala. On July 4th, 2026, standing on center court at Wimbledon before a crowd that refused to sit down, she stepped into one final forehand, watched the ball land inside the line, let her racket slip from her hand, and collapsed to her knees on the most famous stretch of grass in tennis. The tears came before she even hit the ground. At that same moment, millions of people across the Philippines were crying with her. For a nation of 117 million, where no Filipino had ever won a Wimbledon singles match in the open era, this was more than history. It was a breakthrough generations had waited to see. In a way, those worn-out light-up shoes resting in that shoebox had finally reached Wimbledon too. But to understand why this victory carried so much weight, you have to hold two truths in your mind at the same time. The first was Alex Eala's record entering the tournament. She had won only one Grand Slam main draw match in her career and had never advanced beyond the second round of a major. The second was the challenge standing across the net. Waiting for her was Iga Swiatek, the reigning Wimbledon champion, the world number 3, and one of the defining players of her generation. Yet there was another storyline that received far less attention outside coaching circles. The very shot critics had questioned for years, Eala's slower, heavy spin left-handed serve would become one of the biggest weapons she used to disrupt the champion's rhythm. On paper, the gap between them was undeniable. Eala arrived ranked number 32 in the world, while Swiatek stood at number 3. Yes, Eala had defeated her once before in Miami 16 months earlier, but many dismissed that result as a one-off, the perfect day for a fearless wild card against an opponent who never found her best tennis. Since then, Swiatek had added Wimbledon to her collection, strengthening her place among the sport's elite. Eala, meanwhile, had continued climbing steadily. She reached the WTA 250 final in Eastbourne on grass, captured 2 WTA 125 titles, including Birmingham just 4 weeks before Wimbledon, and climbed to a career-high ranking of number 29 earlier in the season. Yet despite those achievements, her Grand Slam resume still looked remarkably thin. The biggest tournaments in tennis had never reflected the level she was showing everywhere else. That was the pressure everyone could measure. The greater challenge, however, could not be found in rankings or statistics. As Eala later described it, stepping onto center court against Swiatek was deeply personal. It was the little girl in the ruffled socks and flashing shoes walking into a place where no Filipino player had ever truly belonged before. By the time she fell to her knees, she wasn't simply celebrating the biggest victory of her career. She was releasing years of sacrifice, expectation, and belief. Those tears were not just for one match. They were for a dream that had finally become real. And fittingly, the battle itself reflected every bit of that emotion. The opening set alone stretched to 84 exhausting minutes, turning what should have been the beginning of a tennis match into a test of resilience, belief, and history itself. The opening set unfolded like a true heavyweight title fight, with momentum swinging back and forth almost every game. Eala earned the first break for a 2-1 lead after drilling a fearless forehand passing shot down the line, only to see IGA Swiatek answer immediately. But Eala had come prepared with a game plan few expected. She repeatedly floated high, looping returns deep into the court, disrupting Swiatek's rhythm before finishing points with sharply angled passing shots. The tactic wasn't accidental. It was the product of careful preparation and hours of studying the defending champion's patterns. Eala surged ahead again to lead 5-3 and stepped to the baseline with her first opportunity to capture the opening set. Then the champion responded exactly as champions do. Swiatek fired 3 consecutive forehand winners, erased the danger, and calmly held serve to level the score at 5-all. It was the kind of comeback that has crushed countless lower-ranked players over the years. But Alex Eala refused to blink. Instead of letting the momentum slip away, she matched the pressure point for point until the set reached a dramatic tiebreak. That was where the match quietly began to change. The very shot critics had questioned throughout her career, her slower, high-spinning left-handed serve became one of the most effective weapons on the court. Time after time, the ball dropped awkwardly at Swiatek's feet, denying the pole the clean returns she normally produces with ease. After the match, Swiatek herself admitted that Eala's slower serve was unexpectedly difficult to attack, explaining that the slower it came, the harder it became to time properly. It was a remarkable admission from the reigning Wimbledon champion, acknowledging that a unique style, not overwhelming power, had unsettled her game. The tiebreak itself became an exhausting battle of nerves. Eala led, then trailed, then fought back again as both players traded clutch points under immense pressure. She saved multiple set points with fearless serving and composed shot-making, refusing to surrender. Finally, on her 4th opportunity to close the set, Swiatek pushed a forehand long, and center court erupted. Alex Eala had taken the opening set from the defending Wimbledon champion. From that moment forward, something visibly changed. She carried herself differently, moved with greater freedom, and played with the confidence of someone who truly believed she belonged on the biggest stage in tennis. The second set became a masterclass in fearless execution. Eala broke serve immediately, then held at love with 2 aces. The same serve so many had labeled her weakness, now delivering free points against one of the greatest returners in the game. She broke again to race ahead 3-0 and soon found herself sitting during the changeover with a commanding 4-0 lead. For those remarkable minutes, rankings meant nothing. The underdog had become the superior player, dictating nearly every exchange against the defending champion. Still, champions rarely disappear quietly. Swiatek fought back to recover 1 break and narrow the deficit to 4-2, setting up one final test of Eala's composure. The closing game turned into a battle of pure resilience, stretching through 6 deuces as every point carried enormous weight. By then, the story had become about far more than tennis. It was about standing on a stage no Filipino player had ever conquered and finding the courage to finish the job. Eala fought off 4 breakback points, absorbing everything the champion threw at her. Swiatek even produced one of the finest backhand winners of her tournament to erase Eala's first match point. But on the 3rd opportunity, serving for the biggest victory of her career, Eala stepped inside the baseline and unleashed her 24th winner of the afternoon. As the ball landed inside the court, center court seemed to pause for a heartbeat before exploding into celebration. The statistics confirmed that this was no lucky upset. Eala finished with 24 winners against just 21 unforced errors, converted 5 of her 7 break points, saved 8 of the 11 she faced, and won an impressive 55% of points behind her second serve. Swiatek, by comparison, managed only 32% behind her own second serve while committing 44 unforced errors. Those numbers painted the picture of a player who had not simply survived against a champion, but had thoroughly outplayed one through preparation, discipline, and fearless execution. Yet statistics are rarely what people remember. What lives forever is what happened after the final ball landed, because the next 60 seconds would become one of the most unforgettable moments in Philippine sporting history when the final ball landed and the umpire announced the score. Alex Eala didn't explode with the kind of celebration tennis fans are used to seeing. There was no roar, no leap into the air, no victory lap around center court. Instead, she simply let her racket fall from her hand. Her palms covered her face, her knees gave way beneath her, and she sank onto the grass as years of pressure, sacrifice, and belief poured out in tears. Moments later, still fighting to compose herself during the on-court interview, she delivered the words that resonated far beyond Wimbledon. Quoting directly from the official Wimbledon transcript, she said, "Maybe for someone like IGA, who's won so many slams, or for someone like Serena or Venus, this achievement may seem small. But for someone who grew up in the Philippines, I went to train with my brother and my grandfather every day after school. For someone who grew up in the Philippines, with my ruffled socks and light-up shoes and chubby cheeks, this is everything." It was a statement that instantly struck a chord with millions watching back home because it wasn't about rankings, trophies, or prize money. It was about remembering exactly where the dream began. And before the applause had even faded, Eala revealed another side of her mentality. Through the emotion, she smiled and added, "Because I'm emotional does not mean I'm satisfied. So next round, let's go." In one sentence, she showed both gratitude for how far she had come and the relentless ambition that had carried her there in the first place. To truly understand why those words carried so much meaning, you have to know the man she affectionately called Lolo Bob. Lolo is the Filipino word for grandfather, and according to Eala herself in an interview with Clay magazine, he was the person who first placed a tennis racket in her hands. He wasn't a professional coach or a famous instructor. He was simply a devoted club player who loved the sport deeply enough to study it through books, spend countless hours watching matches on television, and pass everything he learned to his family. He helped coach Alex's mother, inspired her brother and cousins, and transformed ordinary afternoons after school into treasured moments on the tennis court. What started as family time slowly became the foundation of one of the greatest stories in Philippine sports. In another interview published around the time of her Wimbledon victory, Eala reflected on his influence with heartfelt honesty, saying, "Every time I do something important, I think of him. He worked so hard and sacrificed so much for me. That is why, standing on center court before the entire tennis world, mentioning her brother and grandfather wasn't a rehearsed line or an emotional soundbite. It was a public tribute to the two people who believed in her long before anyone else did. Even the tennis world recognized the significance of what had happened." In her post-match press conference, IGA Swiatek spoke with remarkable honesty, acknowledging that she needed to improve from the very beginning of the match and openly admitting that Eala's unique serve had disrupted her rhythm. Rather than searching for excuses, the defending champion gave full credit to the player who had outplayed her. Among elite competitors, there is perhaps no greater compliment than hearing a champion admit that they must evolve their own game to solve yours. Long before this unforgettable Wimbledon run, another sporting legend had already recognized Eala's potential. Earlier in the year, boxing icon Manny Pacquiao, the only 8-division world champion in history and one of the greatest athletes the Philippines has ever produced, spoke proudly about her during an ABS-CBN interview. He said he was proud of Alex Eala because she represented the Philippines with honor and carried the nation's flag wherever she competed. Those words now carried even greater weight because on center court at Wimbledon, she had done exactly that, making an entire country believe that its place on tennis' biggest stage had finally arrived to the Philippines around the world. When I look at her, I say, we need more of that. Keep it up. Work hard. Those words from Manny Pacquiao carried far more weight than a simple compliment. 4 generations of Filipinos who woke up before sunrise to gather around televisions for Pacquiao's legendary fights, hearing the country's greatest sporting icon say, "We need more of that," about a 21-year-old tennis player felt like the passing of a torch. It wasn't merely praise, it was recognition. One national hero was publicly welcoming another onto the biggest stage. And the country embraced that moment immediately. ESPN's Miguel Alonso Carmon captured the feeling perfectly, writing that the Sunday mornings once reserved for Pacquiao's championship bouts had now given way to evenings filled with the same anticipation for Alex Eala's matches. The emotions were familiar, only the stage had changed. The roar of the boxing ring had been replaced by the silence of a tennis court, but the hope shared by millions of Filipinos remained exactly the same. The scale of what Eala accomplished is difficult to overstate. The Philippines is home to roughly 117 million people spread across more than 7,000 islands, with millions more living overseas. Yet before this remarkable Wimbledon run, no Filipino man or woman had ever won a main draw singles match at the tournament during the Open era, which began in 1968. Alex Eala didn't just end that drought. She won 3 matches in a single fortnight. She became the first Filipina to reach the 3rd round of a Grand Slam and then went even further by becoming the first to reach the 2nd week. Earlier in the season, she had already climbed to a career-high ranking of number 29, the highest ranking ever achieved by a Filipino player in WTA history. Now, with every victory on center court, her achievements were beginning to transcend tennis itself. Without anyone planning it, she was growing into a cultural figure whose impact stretched far beyond the sport. A young left-hander from Quezon City who developed her game at the Rafa Nadal Academy and was inspiring an entire nation to dream bigger. Some victories become larger than the competition that produced them, and this was undeniably one of those moments. Yet it's easy to overlook how close the story came to unfolding very differently. Just 48 hours earlier, Eala had been fighting for survival in the 2nd round against Australia's Maya Joint, a player who had already defeated her earlier in the season. She dropped the opening set 6-3, and for a while it seemed as though the familiar doubts surrounding her Grand Slam record might return once again. Critics had questioned whether her success on the regular tour could ever translate to tennis' biggest stages. But instead of allowing those doubts to define her, she responded with authority, storming through the final 2 sets 6-2, 6-0 in a performance ESPN described as sweet revenge. That sequence is what makes this Wimbledon run so extraordinary. One day, she was battling back from a disappointing start against an opponent who had beaten her before. 2 days later, she was standing across the net from the defending Wimbledon champion on center court, calmly producing the finest performance of her career. The difference between those 2 moments wasn't talent. She had always possessed that. The real difference was resilience, experience, and the confidence to trust her game under the greatest pressure she had ever faced. This wasn't a fairy tale or a lucky Cinderella run. It was the result of years of disciplined work, careful preparation, and a player finally performing at the level she had spent her entire career chasing. And that brings the story back to where it began, to that quiet shoebox resting inside a family home in Manila. Inside are the light-up shoes whose batteries stopped working long ago, and the little ruffled socks that no longer fit anyone. They may look like ordinary childhood keepsakes, but after everything that happened at Wimbledon, they've become symbols of something much greater. Because every unforgettable moment on center court can be traced back to the dreams of a little girl who once wore them, picked up a racket after school, and believed that one day she belonged on the biggest stage in tennis. Somewhere inside a family home in Manila, those little shoes probably still sit in an old shoebox. Perhaps they rest on a shelf or in the back of a closet, kept not because they have any practical value, but because parents rarely throw away the tiny shoes of a child whose dreams grew into something extraordinary. They belong to a little girl who hurried onto a tennis court every afternoon after school to rally with the grandfather she lovingly called Lolo Bob. She wasn't chasing history back then. She wasn't thinking about Wimbledon or world rankings. Like children everywhere, she picked up a racket for the simplest reason imaginable: to spend time with someone she loved. That was enough. 15 years later, on July 4th, 2026, that very same swing produced the 24th winner that defeated the reigning Wimbledon champion on center court. Moments later, the woman holding that racket dropped to her knees and cried. The swing had never really changed. Neither had the person behind it. What changed was the stage. The little girl who once dreamed on neighborhood courts was now standing in the most famous arena in tennis, proving that dreams built through ordinary afternoons can eventually echo around the world. After the match, IGA Swiatek reflected on the defeat by saying, "I need to work from the beginning." She was speaking about improving her own game, but in another sense, Those words perfectly captured what Alex Eala had just inspired across the Philippines. She had made an entire nation want to begin believing again. Children who had never imagined themselves holding a tennis racket suddenly had someone who looked like them, spoke like them, and proved that the impossible could become possible. The journey, however, was far from over. Later that day, Eala would return to center court to face number 13 seed Jasmine Paolini, the 2024 Wimbledon finalist, with a place in her first ever Grand Slam quarterfinal on the line. Even before the match, Paolini acknowledged the challenge ahead, describing Eala as a very dangerous player. Respect from champions and finalists is earned, never given. And by this point, Eala had earned it from everyone left in the draw. The little light-up shoes resting in that shoebox would never make the trip to London, but the girl who once wore them would walk onto center court once more, standing just one victory away from taking Filipino tennis somewhere it had never gone before, in the open era. Whether she won that next match or not, one story had already reached its perfect ending. A little girl wearing ruffled socks ran onto a court simply to play with her grandfather. Years later, a young woman fell to her knees on the biggest court in tennis, and in the most important moment of her life, she thought of him. Sometimes, that is what history really looks like.